And now for the top five best Orioles offseason moves, the companion piece to last week's worst offseason moves. Dad's back. Dad, how you doing?
I'm great. I'm amazed that you had me back.
Yeah, it was a tough decision, but we decided to go that route. So this is gonna be fun. It's the last time it was kind of doom and gloom, and this time will be a little more upbeat and talking about some good times.
Yeah, we'll actually be interesting this time, so I'm excited.
Right, we'll be 25% more interesting at least. I'll
Or your
kick this or your money back. I'll
yeah.
kick this thing off. The number five best Orioles offseason move was February 2014. They signed Nelson Cruz to a 1 year, $8 million contract.
Oh, that's so good. Yes, that was an awesome move, and it made all the difference that year, didn't it?
It did. So just to go back in 2013, Cruz was popped for 50 games for PEDs. He was no team wanted him. He was sitting out there in February, and like nobody, like he's been a 25 to 30 homer guy in Texas, and nobody wanted him. So Dan Duquette threw him a flyer 1 year, come to Baltimore, and he led the AL in homers with 40. He hit in the middle of a lineup that went to the ALCS and was their power hitter when Davis struggled and eventually got suspended himself. So I think the value of this move, the timing of this move. I think everything about this move was great. It would have been even better if they would have re-signed him.
Well, and that year, you remember the Orioles win the American League East for the first time since 1997, and that was a big deal. And they don't get there without Nelson Cruz. And what was interesting, really interesting, I remember the talk in the off season was that he was thought to be a low character guy, and he turned out just to be the best, the best teammate that they could have asked for. And of course, his production, as you mentioned, was just outstanding.
Yeah, he really was, and he give the jolt of the home run bomb whenever they needed it. So it felt like whenever Cruz came up there, he hit the clutch homer or the go ahead homer. So who is your number five?
Well, I'm going to go ahead. You mentioned Crush, Chris Davis. When Chris Davis comes to town, understand it's 2011. The Orioles are in the throes of what was it, their 14th consecutive losing season. And they do this deal with the Texas Rangers, and they trade a relief pitcher, Koji Uehara, for Chris Davis and right-handed pitcher Tommy Hunter. And both of those guys made a big difference for them, really starting the following season in 2012 when they surprised and shocked everybody by sneaking into the wild card and getting into the playoffs that year. So I think that was a huge move. It was part of the dealings that got them, those 5 or 6 really good seasons in a row. So that was my number five, Chris Davis, Tommy Hunter for Koji in 2011.
That's a good one. Koji really didn't do too much. He was just kind of like a middle reliever. I don't think he really contributed much. To think that we got Davis and Tommy, who was the closer for a brief period, it's pretty good.
Davis had a good year or two in Texas and was really, scuffling along when the Orioles picked him up. So I don't think that the Rangers had any idea that of the value that he would have. Now, of course, looking at it from today's perspective, obviously he's, an albatross around their neck with, that big $22 million per year deal. But from 2012 through 2016, he was an awfully good guy to have. And Tommy Hunter was no slouch either. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, he saved some games. He was really better as a setup guy. But that was my number five. I thought those guys really made a big difference for the
I like it. For my number four pick, I'm going old school. I'm going the year you were born. I'm going December 1968. I'm going the Orioles trading for Mike Cuellar, acquiring him from the Houston Astros. Now, that deal they sent, it was outfielder slash catcher, which I didn't know that was a thing. Kurt Bleferi? I don't know. John
Guys.
Mason to Bleferi they got Cuellar, Enzo Hernandez, and Tom Johnson. Cuellar was good in Houston. He was good, but he wasn't great. He was good, but he wasn't great. And he came to Baltimore and was great. He won the Cy Young in 1969. He led the American League in wins with 24 in 1970. He was a part of the 1971 rotation where he had 420 game winners. And in his 8 years, he won 143 games and he only had 88 losses. So I call that pretty good.
Yeah, he was the epitome of the crafty lefty. I don't remember much about him, obviously, because he came along, or I came along early in that. But I remember being an O's fan in the '70s and listening to the announcers Tom Barr and Chuck Thompson talk about that rotation of '71 with the 4 20-game winners. Can you name all four, by the way?
Palmer, Cuellar, Pat Dobson, Dave McNally.
There you go. Sweet.
The Dave McNally one I always forget. I always thought that McNally was the guy in the '80s, but he came along 1971, and then they lost the World Series that year to the Reds? No, they beat the
'71.
Yeah,
Pittsburgh Pirates.
Pittsburgh Pirates. Okay, little fun fact for you. That's I like mine. I'm confident with mine. Who's your number 4 pick?
I'm going back to the '80s. 1988. The Orioles do a mid-season deal, and they pick up a young Brady Anderson, 24 years old, nothing but potential. And they get a guy who would later be known for his bloody sock in the playoffs as the Red Sox win their first World Series in forever. And of course, that's Curt Schilling. They give up Mike Boddicker, who pitched brilliantly for them in 1983 and helped them win the World Series. Won 20 games for them in 1984, but otherwise really was a very mediocre, very average pitcher for them. So they give up on Boddicker in '88 to pick up Brady Anderson and Curt Schilling. As you know, Anderson goes on to, be their top of the lineup guy. 50 home runs in 1996. Curt Schilling, of course, the Orioles known for always trading pitchers that they're going to need. Give him up, trade him to Houston. He ends up with the Phillies, where he becomes a star, and eventually, with the Red Sox and the Diamondbacks, where he becomes a world champion. So that's number 4 for me. I think that trade really sets the Orioles up for a nice run that they have in the '90s, culminating in some playoff appearances in '96 and '97.
I agree with it. Set them up for a run. My only thing with that is that Brady Anderson. Everybody knows him for that 50 home run season, which he almost certainly was on steroids. And then he really wasn't the guy other than that, if I'm looking back correctly.
He could steal bases. He was a good guy in the outfield. Was he juicing? It seems like maybe, when you only hit 22 or 24 at tops, and all of a sudden you bust out with 50. That suggests that there's something going on. Maybe just had a really good off season. I don't know. But still, I don't think that dings his value to the O's, because he helped to win a lot of games. So I'm standing pat, regardless of whether or not he was putting needles in his butt.
All right, number 3. This is right up your alley. I wondered if you have this one on your list. I'm going December 1993, signing free agent Rafael Palmeiro to a 5-year, $30 million contract. Rafi, in the last 4 years of that contract, averaged nearly 40 homers and 120 RBIs. He is a crucial part of the 96 and 97 postseason teams. He had a lot of home runs in the postseasons, if I was looking at those stats correctly. And then he liked Baltimore so much he came back at the very end of his career. So, Oriole for life, Rafael Palmeiro.
How can you ding me on Brady Anderson and then immediately follow up with Rafael Palmeiro? I mean, he was the guy that goes to Congress. They wasn't Canseco, who all of a sudden could. No, that wasn't Canseco that couldn't speak English. It was
Sammy Sosa.
Sammy Sosa, though. He couldn't understand English when asked about steroids in baseball. But Palmeiro, raises the hand and says, I didn't take steroids, and then gets suspended. But regardless, I'll give you some credit for the pick. I think it's a good one. He did a lot for the Orioles. He was a clutch player. He was a quality player. It's just a shame that that's how he's remembered now, because he was just awfully good for such a long time.
The consistency in those 5 years, I think the first year was the shortened season because of the player strike. So 94 is a little bit weird, but 95 when the end of the contract happened, 40 plus ish homers a year. And, I think Brady Anderson's 1 year of 50. If Brady was on steroids and putting up those kind of numbers consistently, it would have been a little bit better. But Rafi was day in, day out, hitting homers, sticking needles in his butt. He was doing his thing.
So he was consistent about his steroid use, which which makes it better versus Brady, who decided to try it for 1 year and see, if he could challenge Babe Ruth for the home run title.
Rafi wasn't a quitter, and you
But he
know
was
that.
not a quitter. He consistently did steroids for those 5 years. Now, who knows? But sadly, he did get caught. But yeah, he was a quality guy. The other thing was he was a good clubhouse guy. He was a good teammate from everything that I've heard. So I like your pick. I think it's rock solid.
Who's your number 3?
I'm going back to 2008, and this is when the Orioles pick up Adam Jones, and they get George Sherrill, they get Chris Tillman, they get a couple other guys, and all they have to do is give up a malcontent pitcher by the name of Erik Bedard. And this trade really sets up the Orioles very nicely for the run that they have in 2012, 2014, and 2016, because these guys, along with Chris Davis, my earlier number 5 pick, really were the nucleus of that team and really made that team go. Adam Jones, of course, is playing in Japan. Is it Korea or Japan?
Japan.
Japan. Okay. He's playing over there now, and I think it was a big mistake for them to let him go because he was a leader of the team, and he could have been helping them right now in the rebuild. But that's my number 3. I think that was huge. I think that it was very insightful, and that's back when the Orioles really knew how to pick talent.
That was a McPhail special. That was a trade where you can kind of hang your hat on. Like anything that happens after that, you're like, well, at least he traded for those guys. You got the Brim Reaper, George Sherrill, who was an all-star for the Orioles that year, and Jones obviously was there forever, and Tillman was the ace for a while. So yeah, I really like that.
Great.
My number 2 pick, December 1965, the Orioles traded for Frank Robinson. They sent Jack Baldwin, Milt Pappas, Dick Simpson to the Reds for Frank Robinson. The guys they gave up weren't that great. Pappas was a 3-time All-Star. They got Baldwin 3 days before they traded him to the Reds, and they got Simpson a week before they traded him to the Reds. So they really didn't even get a chance to do anything. But Robinson was good before they got him. He was an MVP and a Rookie of the Year before that. After the O's got him, 1966 Triple Crown winner. He got the Orioles to 3 World Series, and they won 2.
Yeah, and he was the MVP in their first World Series against the Dodgers in 1966. And when you talk about key pieces of the puzzle, Frank Robinson was really the first key piece to the Orioles' successful run, which started in 66 and ran through 83. So he really sort of kickstarts them. And I'm going to go ahead and reveal that was also my number 2 pick, was Robinson. And just because of what he meant for the club. And of course, he goes into the Hall of Fame wearing an Orioles cap, which
I didn't know that.
Which is a tip of the cap to the Orioles, so to speak, for really helping him. He wins an MVP in both leagues, American League and National League. I think he's still the only player to ever have done that. But yeah, he was just an equality guy, a good clubhouse guy. Goes on to become a manager. I think the first black manager in Major League history when he manages the Indians in 1975 as a player manager. So yeah, awesome pick. My number 2 pick as well, Frank Robinson.
The Orioles loved him so much that they traded him in the early to mid 70s. So that was fun.
They traded him after the 1971 World Series. Go figure that one out.
Yeah. Thanks for helping us get to the World Series, Frank. But you got to grab your stuff. You're out. That was good.
He was up in his 30s by then, and I think they may have felt like his better days were behind him. But he still put up some good numbers after he left, and it would have been good to have had him in 72 and 73 when the Orioles go to the playoffs, but get knocked out real quickly there. So yeah, I think if we go back to our last week's topic of really bad trades, maybe that should have been in there somewhere where trading Frank Robinson. We kind of forgot about that one.
Dang it. Okay. All right. It's the moment you've all been waiting for. This is the number 1 Orioles best offseason move. I'm going. Your number 3 pick is my number 1 pick. The trade of Erik Bedard to the Mariners for Adam Jones, Chris Tillman, and the Brim Reaper George Sherrill. This was the ultimate haul at the time. Jones, he went on to become a 5-time All-Star, a 4-time Gold Glove Award winner. He had 7 consecutive years with 25 or more home runs. Tillman was the ace for 4 years. He was an All-Star in 2013. People forget that. And Sherrill was the Orioles' only All-Star, and he had 51 saves in a year and a half. So to do that for Erik Bedard, who is widely regarded as the biggest jerkwad in the history of the team, I think that was some pretty savvy dealing.
Yeah, and you remember when that deal first happened that the key piece was George Sherrill. He goes on to become the Orioles closer that year. And he really, the other guys really kind of look to be throw-ins.
Yep.
And they start bringing him up, and obviously Adam Jones, they bring him up, and he does what he does, and Chris Tillman, all of a sudden he bursts out into the scene in 2012. So it wasn't initially apparent how good that trade was, because really I think the Orioles were looking for some relief in the bullpen, and they just picked up these other guys, and it just turned out to be brilliant. Maybe they knew what they were getting, but as a fan, you really didn't have a good sense of what it meant at that point. It's only, I guess, in retrospect that you realize these things.
No, that's a good point. Even though Jones was a first round pick, so he was like the key piece for like the young guys. But Chris Tillman, they plucked him out of high A ball. They were scouting the Mariners high A ball, and they liked him enough, and nobody really knew who he was, and they plucked him out, and he went on to become their de facto ace for their playoff runs and started a bunch of key games for him. So that was a good savvy dealing on McPhail's part. I'm curious to see who your number one is.
Well, you realize that I became a fan of the Orioles in the 70s, and it was the 1979 season. The Orioles are charging into the playoffs with over 100 wins. They demolish the Angels in the ALCS, and they end up in the World Series against the Pittsburgh Pirates, who had beat them in 71. We should have known it was still faded when they matched up with them again, but the key pieces of that 79 team and teams in 80, 81, 82, and 83 were the players that they got from the Yankees during a midseason trade in 1976. They pick up Rick Dempsey. They pick up Tippy Martinez. They pick up Scott McGregor. These are guys that were the guts of the heart of those late 70s, early 80s teams. And the Orioles win a World Series with them in 83. They go to 2 World Series with these guys overall. And they give up one of the players. None of these guys. Well, Elrod Hendricks, you would know. Maybe Ken Holtzman, you would have heard of. I'm hard pressed to tell you who any of these guys are. Doyle Alexander, a right-handed pitcher, the Orioles gave up. A funny story about that. George Steinbrenner, obviously the owner of the Yankees, had bought them in the early 70s, and so he was rebuilding them into the glory years of the Yankees. So, but he didn't know a whole lot about baseball. So the story is, and this is from Sparky Lyle in his 1978 book, The Bronx Zoo. The story is that George Steinbrenner's son goes to him and says, "Dad, you gotta get Doyle Alexander on our team. If we get him, he'll pitch us to the World Series." And George, being George, says, "Okay." And he signs off on this terrible trade for the Yankees. So the Yankees end up giving up all these great guys. They get a bunch of has-beens, including Doyle Alexander. Doyle Alexander misses the playoffs in 76 because he's injured. Comes back to pitch the first game of the World Series against the Reds and loses. At the end of the 76 season, he becomes a free agent and goes to the Rangers. In 77, of course, the Yankees win the World Series without Alexander. So that's just kind of the sad story there. But for the Orioles, what a great deal.
I like that one. Yeah, I saw that one listed. There was it was like 15 pieces in that trade that were going back and forth. And it was really rare that the Orioles and Yankees would be trading around because guys, the rivals, same division, you're going at it, and then you're like, okay, we'll take your guy, you take our guy. So that was a little unexpected, but I like that one. That was a good pick.
And it wasn't even the biggest trade the Orioles ever did with the Yankees. They did a bigger one back in the 50s.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
when the Yankees end up getting Don Larson from the Orioles, and Don Larson goes on to pitch. As always, the Orioles give up a pitcher that they're going to need later. Don Larson goes on and pitches a no hitter for the Yankees in the World Series. So that wasn't even the biggest deal. And more recently, um, okay, the Orioles key relief pitcher Who did they trade to the Yankees a couple? Was it like a couple seasons ago? Help me.
They traded Zach Britton.
Zach Britton, right? So that was the most recent deal that they did, I believe.
Yeah, it just blows my mind that interdivision rivals make trades together. But no, I like that one. I see. I think with mine, I try to avoid the mid-season ones. I try to stay in the vein of the off seasons. That's why I did a lot of free agent signings and trades and what have you. But I like that you threw in some mid-season ones.
I like the heat of the moment trades, because those are the ones you just never quite know what you're going to end up with. It always seems like that when you're trading a veteran for a bunch of rookies, that the team getting the veteran is going to benefit the most because they're hopefully going to go deep into the playoffs. But so often it seems like the team that gets the 4 or 5 rookies or prospects
Mm-hmm.
end up making out better on the deal. So that's why I went number one with the big 1976 trade, the Orioles and the Yankees.
I like it. Dad, thank you so much. We'll have to have you come back and do some more top fives about the Orioles. But no, this has been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me back on. I love doing this, and it brings back a lot of great memories.